can't help but notice that Asa Hutchinson, who has zero chance of being the Republican nominee and is polling at, nothing in currently in the Republican primary, is getting lots of media attention. Meanwhile, the only declared Democrat in the race, because remember, Joe Biden hasn't even declared that he's running for president, has been almost completely shut out. And Marianne Williamson, I gotta say, she's got a little bit of a bump in the polls here that's kind of noteworthy and does, I don't want to overstate things whatsoever, and I don't want to be naive about any of this, but does have some echoes into the early rise of Bernie Sanders back in 2016. Let's put this up on the screen from Newsweek. The headline here is Marianne Williamson making gains against Joe Biden, new poll suggests. So the very first poll that had her name in it, she was at 4%. And just a few weeks later, she's now made it into double digits. She's at 10%. That's actually almost exactly the same trajectory of Bernie early in the race. His very first poll was 4%, and then a few weeks later, he hit 10%, and then he went up from there. Obviously, the dynamics are very different because you're talking about an incumbent president. On the other hand, it is effectively a head-to-head, one-on-one. So, it's interesting that clearly, even as she's been nearly completely shut out by the media, voters are hearing something from her that is making them interested in an alternative. And the other thing I'll say, Sagar, here is, while I certainly think it is a longest of long shots to imagine that Marianne could actually supplant Biden, I think she is being a bit underestimated. People forget that this was a woman who was, a national figure, best-selling author in her own right before she ever took up politics. So there are a lot of, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who's like mom and grandma loves Marianne Williamson.
Right, totally.
So she has that. And then you also just have, Biden is making a lot of mistakes now with regard to the progressive base. People are very upset with him on a number of issues. And you have a majority of the Democratic base that is saying they would like someone other than Joe Biden. So there is clearly an organic interest in an alternative candidate. So I think to just dismiss her out of hand or to shut her out of the media as they have is kind of outrageous. And it shows you that, the thing that they really look for is, number one, candidates who are going to say the things that make them comfortable and that also have the sort of like in the club credentialing that the corporate press, that the corporate press esteems and takes seriously.
Yeah, look, 10%, as you said, it's a long shot. It's always going to be difficult taking on an incumbent president. That is still pretty high. If you consider what an insurgent candidate would look like.
That's higher than everybody than DeSantis.
That is higher. Yeah, that is higher than everybody but Ron DeSantis in the Republican primary. They get plenty of media coverage. It's higher than Andrew Yang ever got in any major Democratic poll. So it's not nothing. And at the very least, if they allow a debate to happen, that would qualify you for the debate stage, which is, I believe, what was the old metric? You had to be polling at least 2% and
like
raise
that.
X amount per money. I doubt she would have any problem with the money. So, okay, polling-wise, she at least checks the box to what she was much more so than what she held in the 2020 primary. So, anyway, I think it's interesting. I don't really have anything else to say about it.
Yeah, I think, again, the media piece of this, it really irritates me because think of how much press Nikki Haley has gotten.
Oh, tons, yeah. Right.
And she's at, 3, maybe 4% on a good day in the polls. And it reminds me very much of last time around in 2020 in the Democratic primary, in which candidates they took seriously as real contenders and which ones they completely tried to dismiss. Because Andrew Yang, obviously, at the beginning, they tried to completely black out. They'd get his name wrong. They just leave him out of polls because they didn't want to talk about him. When he was out polling, some of their darling Beto and Kamala and whatever, he'd be polling ahead of them, but they'd just pretend like he didn't exist. And so it's partly they take credentials as gospel, number one, and number two, this particular type of DC credentials, by the way. And number two, they don't want to platform anyone who's going to say anything that they find to be uncomfortable. Listen, everybody knows I'm friends with Marianne. I'm not a disinterested party here. And so I also have some insight into the fact, look, MSNBC, which is supposed to be the progressive, lean left, whatever, lean forward network, I don't think that she's gotten maybe she's gotten one request from MSNBC, whereas Fox News is beating down her door. So again, it shows you who they decide to elevate and who they decide to try to quash. The one thing that I will say, which I think is a real positive, is every year that goes by, the mainstream corporate media gets less and less powerful, and they have less control over, what people think and what people see and what people hear and what ideas they're open to. And so I think that's why you see some bump here in the polls for Marianne.
Yeah, it's certainly